In the last 11 years, I have built over 80 sales teams with sales over $100 million. And in this video, I'm gonna teach you how to gain trust with anybody, identify your prospect's biggest challenge, navigate sales conversations so you never get objections, how to structure a sales call, and charge a shit ton of money for your product or service. But at any point in this video, if you feel like you can't do this, then you should probably switch careers now because you have no business selling anything to anyone. That being said, in this video, I'm gonna share with you the 13 things that you must master if you wanna make real money in sales. Let's talk about building trust. It is critical that you learn the skill of building trust really quickly. And the first thing here to really master is building rapport. Unfortunately, so many salespeople feel that building rapport comes from talking about the weather or where the person comes from. That is absolutely not the case. Does it help to have shared interests in common? Of course it does, but in a sales conversation, it comes across pretty disingenuous when you're trying to probe and trying to find points of overlap in your personal lives. The reality is rapport is built by their perspective on your ability to deliver on a promise to solve a problem that they experience. Rewind the video if you need to hear that again. It is critical that in the very beginning you spend little time talking about the weather or restaurants and spend a lot more time getting to the point and showing that you are competent as somebody who can help them solve a problem that's critical to their business. Which leads me to the second thing here, which is build credibility. If you can master building credibility, then you're gonna find yourself propelled throughout your sales career. And this comes from showing that you know the world of the prospect, referencing other people you've helped, how you've helped them, the challenges that some of your prospects have gone through and how you've helped them overcome those challenges. Those customer stories, even if they're short, saying something like, oh, I worked with this type of customer before in the past, they were in the same situation as you. That type of language goes a long way in building credibility, which you need in order to build trust. Which leads me to the third thing here, strong tonality. You need to speak with confidence and authority. It is not okay to be mumbling around, over talking, confused about what to do next. You need to show that you are very comfortable in this conversation. Not to be confused with you should never ask them questions of clarification. You should just never be confused on what direction you are taking this call. We are trying to get a next step on the calendar. That's the purpose of the sales call. It might be a next step, it might be a deal actually closing, whatever it is for you. Make sure you have confidence and authority, and your tone should show that. Never sound weak, and definitely never sound like you have no idea what you're talking about. And the best way to build trust and do everything that I've just mentioned so far is by deeply understanding the problems that your prospects encounter. And that leads me to the second main category here, which is identify prospect's problem. The better you are and identifying what problem is genuinely impacting your potential customer's business, the better you're gonna be able to close a deal. Which leads me to our fourth thing you need to master here, which is know the buyer better than they know themselves. The reality is, as a salesperson, you talk to more people in the role of the person you're selling to than they do. You have a lot more context. You see their role with a different lens, and you need to be able to deeply understand their role, their challenges, what keeps them up at night, how do they feel that they've been successful in their role. You need to know that better than they do. I often say you should be able to go to a local meetup group of just your buyers and not one person there know that you're a salesperson. They'll just assume that you're in the same role that they are because you're so comfortable in that environment. Which leads me to the fifth thing that you need to master here, which is ask questions. You really need to spend most of your time on sales calls asking questions for deeper understanding. If you think it to be true, it's not true. If the prospect says it to be true, then it's true. And the only way you can get the prospect to tell you something is by asking thoughtful questions based on what they've told you. These are questions like, what's motivating us to have this conversation today? What motivated you to try finding a new solution? What's motivating you to make this change over here? Why is this a top priority now? How have you tried to solve this problem before in the past? Why do you think that didn't work out? You need to ask, because then the prospect starts telling you what the true challenges are. And what's even crazier is it helps them as the prospect shape what they feel they need to solve the problem. A lot of people you talk to haven't thought all that deeply about how to solve the problem. They're just looking for solutions. And by you asking the right questions and pulling out as many details as possible, you can help them paint the picture of what the solution to the problem looks like. And because you have a solution to the problem, you can be the co-artist in making sure that you've painted yourself in their picture. Which leads me to the sixth thing you need to master here: clarify to understand. I often say you should be the dumb salesperson, which somewhat contradicts what I said earlier about tonality. You need to keep that authoritative tone. But if something doesn't make sense, you need to ask clarifying questions. It is okay not to know what somebody is talking about. So if someone says something and in your head you're like, I don't exactly know what they mean here, ask them about it. Say things like, hey, I'm confused a little bit here. Why is that such a big problem? Or, hey, I would imagine that you would just focus a lot on getting new customers. What's the problem with that thing over there, right? Ask these clarifying questions. Make sure you pull out of them really deep understanding of their problem, because you need that understanding to be able to position your product or service as a true solution to their challenge. Which leads me to the seventh thing that you need to master here, which is never pushing your own agenda. It is not about you, it is about them. And the more you push what you want, which is a deal to close, the more they feel that you're trying to push something on them, and the less they trust you. But the more you put your own agenda to the side and you focus on having a deeper understanding of their challenge, the more that they trust you, which leads to them giving you more information, which allows you to better position yourself and ask better questions, which leads to more information. It's a positive feedback loop. And you need that positive feedback loop to build trust so then you can position your product or service accordingly. The next category here is really around navigating the conversation so you do not get objections, which leads us to the eighth thing that you need to master, which is know the common objections. So what objections are you getting quite often? It might be, it's too expensive, or we already have something in place. Maybe you get the objection that they need to talk to somebody else. They need to get someone else involved in this decision before they move forward. Maybe their objection is they feel it's gonna take too long to implement the solution, or they're just telling you that they simply need to think about it. Whatever it is, you need to make sure that you understand the objections you get the most commonly so you can properly navigate the conversation to avoid getting them at the end of the conversation when you're talking about money. Which leads us to the ninth thing here: proactively bring up objections. This is critical. If you are getting objections to your product or service at the end of the sale, after you've talked about money and how much it costs, there's all of this pressure to make a decision. That's the worst time to try to navigate an objection, because there's a lot of pressure and you are incentivized. No matter how well you do building trust, you are still incentivized to get a deal made. So you lose a little credibility in their eyes when you're trying to navigate objections at the end. So I recommend pulling them out in the beginning and be proactive about doing that. So what does that look like? Well, if you're getting it's too expensive quite a bit, you might want to let them know what the cost looks like earlier on. You might also want to know what are they paying for other things to try to solve this problem, or even just how much is this problem costing them. You want to pull out those things earlier, and you can ask questions like, hey, generally when I talk to somebody who's losing customers because of this problem, they're totally fine spending $100, $200, $1,000 a month in order to solve that problem. I'm curious, have you thought about what's your tolerance or what you're willing to spend in order to get a solution in place? Let's go to the next one here. We already have something in place. Well, early on in the conversation, you're gonna be asking questions around what their current process is. And if they have something in place, you're gonna ask them, what would motivate you to leave that solution? And then when they tell you what that could be, you wanna challenge them is that really a big enough deal to change entire solutions here? You want to make sure that they are committed before we get to the end of the conversation where they bring this up when there's money on the line and there's all that pressure that I talked about earlier. Let's go to the next one, which is I need approval from another decision maker. Well, this is something else we should figure out early in the conversation. So when you're talking to the prospect, you should ask them, hey, generally when I talk to people in this role, they also want so-and-so to take a look at it. I'm curious, are you gonna want so-and-so to take a look at the solution as well? And if the answer is yes, you should probably book some time with them. Spend a little time with that prospect, do some deeper discovery, and then schedule the demo with them and the other decision maker. Whatever you need to do, but you gotta pull that out earlier. If not, you're just hoping that they do a good job selling your solution internally. And guess what? Your prospects aren't salespeople. So usually they're not that great at selling things internally. Let's talk about it's going to take too long to implement. Again, another objection you do not want at the very end. So early on in the conversation, you should be asking them, what are their plans or their hopes for implementation? How long do they want to wait before a solution's in place? These types of questions help you pull out how fast they need to move, and are you going to be able to match that speed? Because if you can calm that concern before you get to the end of the conversation, then you're much more likely to get a deal done. All right, well, let's talk about the last one here, which is I need to think about it. Now, if you're getting this at the end of the call, it's because they're saying no. And it's generally a different objection that's really holding them back. So if you do a better job pulling out all of the other objections earlier on, you're not gonna get this one nearly as much. But one thing that you can do early on, especially if you sell a more expensive solution, is you can ask them what their decision-making process looks like. It might reveal that there's other people involved, but also what things that they are considering. How are they weighing this decisions? Are they doing a pros and cons list? Have they really considered what the downside of not doing anything is? You can ask questions like this to make sure that you know what type of information that they need in order to make that decision. So this leads us to the 10th thing that you really need to master, which is trial closing throughout the entire sales conversation. While you're going through the different components of your solution or the different parts of your demo, you need to talk to the customer and get their reaction. What a lot of salespeople do here is they ask yes or no questions. How does this look to you? Is this aligned with what you were hoping for? These questions are so surface level, and the prospect saying yes or no doesn't have that big of an impact. Instead, you want to ask these in open-ended ways. So you might say, hey, I just walked you through this part of our service or our software. I'm curious from your perspective, what do you think the team is going to like about what I just walked you through? What do you think their biggest concerns will be? Another thing you can ask is, how do you see this impacting how you're doing things today? How is this different from how you're doing things today? This is gonna get the prospect to tell you in their voice what they feel the impact of your solution is gonna be. That's critical because you can double click and double click and double click and make sure that they fully believe that this is something that's gonna be impactful for them. So when you get to the end of the conversation, you're not dealing with objections, you're just moving forward. This leads us to number 11 here, which is call out inconsistencies. I can tell you, this is an area that salespeople genuinely do not develop in unless they're very aware of the impact of it, because it's a bit uncomfortable. When a prospect says something that is different than what they might have said earlier, calling that inconsistency out can feel very uncomfortable. But the best salespeople do this because they know the inconsistency, that's where the true objection lies. So for example, if you've done a good job of pulling out common objections early, like let's say, who else would need to take a look at this? And then at the very end of the conversation, they tell you, I want so-and-so to look at it, then you need to call that out. Hey, totally happy to walk through the solution with so-and-so. I am curious though, because earlier when I asked you who else you'd want to see this, you said nobody else. Now you want me to talk to Jason, that's totally fine. But can you help me understand what changed and why do you think it's so important that Jason take a look at this now? This is gonna get the prospect to articulate why they so badly want Jason, in this example, to take a look at the solution and why that changed from when they first got there. What it could be is they didn't realize that you do all of this. Oh, I wasn't aware that you guys are also helping in these areas. That could be an actual good thing. And then if that happens over and over and over again, you could start pulling that earlier into your conversation. Hey, generally when I walk through the solution with people, they say they're surprised that we also touch areas A, B, and C. I'm curious, is there anyone else that you think would want to take a look at this so then they have their voices heard on what solution that you move forward with? Now you can really start structuring how you do these conversations. Which leads us to number 12 here, which is properly structure a sales call. I highly recommend following a real solid structure. Whether you're a software company selling software or you're a service company selling services, you need to follow a real structure whenever doing a sales call. Here's how I like to structure sales calls. The first part is the upfront contract. There should be no sales call with a prospect that doesn't include an upfront contract. And this is really doing more than just setting an agenda. It's setting expectations of what's going to happen next. The reason why an upfront contract is so powerful is because it demystifies the entire sales process. Here's what it sounds like, and then you can go ahead and fill this out with your own information. I really appreciate your time. The purpose of this call is to walk you through how we can help you, whatever your value prop is. Before I jump into my agenda, I'd like to hear from you. What are your expectations from the call? This gets the prospect to tell you what they're looking for. This gives you a ton of insight on how interested they are and where you might want to take the conversation. So the next part of the upfront contract is, thanks for sharing that. I promise you that I'll meet those expectations. In addition, I'm going to be asking you some questions to learn their use case. Is that fair? This is setting the expectation that you're going to ask them questions so you can learn more. This prevents any sort of friction around not jumping right into a demo or jumping right into a pitch of your service. You are setting the expectation with them that you're going to ask questions before you do that. They're going to say, yes, that's okay. And then you're going to continue with the upfront contract. Here's the agenda for this call. Agenda item 1, 2, and 3. And finally, whatever your next step is going to be. Anything you'd like to cover that I might have missed. Now, the important thing here is that you are telling them what the next step is going to be so they know, the next step is going to be pulling in other decision makers or making a buying decision or doing a scoping call. Whatever it might be, you need to be very clear about what the next step you're going to be asking for is. Back to the upfront contract. We have an hour scheduled. Do you have a hard stop? And finally, at the end of this call, we will decide next step. Does that sound fair? So if the decision is to purchase or not, that's what you're saying there. Finally, by the end of this conversation, we're going to decide if it makes sense for you to move forward. Is that fair? You want to get commitment that they will make a commitment to whatever the next step is at the end of the call. It could be a yes, could be a no. Totally okay with me, but we are going to make this commitment at the end of this call. By demystifying the sales process, you are going to have more people who make the decision and less people who say, I need to think about it and all of this weird stuff. So that's why the upfront contract is so powerful. The next here is really around the discovery. Now, the discovery is going to look different for everybody. You really need to sit down and think through the discovery questions. What I'll do is I'm going to share with you my 5-part discovery call system with some example questions in there, and you can use that as a guide to create your own. The 5 parts of the discovery are this: current state, the problem, impact, ideal state, and priority. Let's start with the ideal state. Some questions you can ask are, what's motivating this conversation today? Side note, that's my favorite question to start a discovery with. What is your current process for X? How are you doing that today? Tell me a bit about something that's relevant to your solution. Can you please describe? Can you walk me through? These are great ways to ask questions to get a deeper understanding on how they are currently doing it. And that's why we ask these questions. We want to understand how you're currently doing things that are either causing this problem or you're trying to solve this problem with. And as you're asking those questions around the process, you're going to uncover a problem, which leads us to the second stage here, which is problem. Here are some questions you can ask to dive deeper into their challenge. How do you feel about that? How long has this been happening? How have you tried to solve it? Why do you think that problem exists? What do you think is causing that problem? Help me understand, and then whatever you need more understanding on. These questions help pull out more details around the problem, which allows you to seamlessly transition into the impact. You need to deeply understand the impact of the challenge. And a lot of salespeople will miss out on this because they're uncomfortable to ask. And that's why the third stage here is impact. Here are some questions that you can ask. Curious, how is this impacting you specifically? What impact is this having? Help me understand how that impacts you. Now, sometimes you sell solutions where the impacts of problems are pretty obvious, and you might feel uncomfortable asking the impact. That doesn't mean you can skip it. You need to still ask because the impact tells you so much. So what I would recommend doing in that case is leading the question, showing that you understand what the impacts are. That might sound like, hey, generally when I talk to CEOs that have sales teams of 10 or more, they tell me that this problem is so important to them because it's preventing their salespeople from hitting their quota, which means the company isn't hitting their revenue targets. But everyone's a little bit different. Why don't you walk me through what the impact for your organization has been dealing with this problem? I'm asking the impact of the problem, but I'm sharing that I understand that the revenue impact is a pretty obvious one, which allows them either just to confirm that or repeat it in their own words, which is why I have it open-ended instead of a yes or no. So definitely consider asking a question like that if you feel like the impact of the problem that you solve is pretty obvious. That leads us to the fourth stage here, ideal state. You really want to understand what's ideal for you. Where do you want to be? Because we can help you get from where you are to where you want to go. So we need to understand where you want to go. Here are some questions you can ask. What would the ideal situation look like for you? If we fix this problem today, what would success look like a year from now? How would you like things to work? How do you envision a system like this helping? What are you hoping to gain by using a system like ours? All of this is going to help you shape what that ideal state looks like, which you really need to understand, because the more glamorous and the more exciting that ideal state looks, the higher the priority is, which leads us to the fifth thing here, which is priority. You need to understand where on the priority list solving this problem is, because if it's really low on the list, it's going to be hard to make a deal happen. And this is a pretty simple one. You can ask one of these three questions. Where is this on your priority list? How high of a priority is this? Why is this a priority now? My favorite one is asking, why is this a priority now? Because you understand some of the drivers. But that question I generally like to ask after I understand where it stacks on their priority list. So we've covered the upfront contract and the discovery. The next here is the offer. This is, if you have a software, the demo of the software. If you have a service, this is you walking through the components of the service. In either scenario, you are going to break down your product or your service into different segments, and these are different segments of value. So generally I'll have about 5 segments. More complicated solutions might have more, and these are different pieces of value that you are delivering on to help solve that problem. So it might be just one part of your solution. It could be one feature if you're a software, or a collection of features if you're a software. It might be one part of your service. Maybe you sell marketing services and it's the copywriting portion. You want to isolate these in their own segments, and you go through each one of them. And what that looks like is you have the segment, go through the content of the segment, whether it's part of a demo or it's a description of that part of the service, and then you end in a trial close. And what a trial close is, we talked about this briefly earlier, is really asking them what they feel the impact of having this would be. It's not a yes or no. It's not, does this look like something that would be helpful to you? Yes or no. It is them explaining to you the impact of this. So you can ask, how is this different from how you're doing things today? Do you think that's better? What do you think the impact this is going to have on your team? How do you feel this is going to help solve that problem? These are all trial closes that you can ask to get them to tell you how they see this part of your solution really impacting them. This is a critical piece, because once you've gone through all 5 of those, we get to the next section of the structure of the sales call, which is the close. And the close should be very simple at this point. You've done the upfront contract, so they know what's coming here and what decision that they need to make. You've done discovery, so you have a good understanding of their challenges, the impacts of those challenges, and how you're going to be able to position yourself to solve those challenges. You've gone through all segments of your offer, and you've asked great trial questions where they've articulated to you how they feel what you do is actually going to help them solve their problem. So the very natural next step is the close, and it's super simple. This is all I recommend you saying. So based on what we talked about earlier, summarize the value that they have told you from the trial closes that you were asking when you were going through each segment of the offer. From here, there are 2 options, option 1 or option 2. These might be pricing options, these might be onboarding options, different ways of moving forward. You provide them with the 2 options, and then you ask, which do you think makes the most sense for you? If you aren't closing on that call, then ask for the next step, book it in the calendar. This should not be a surprise, whether you ask for the business or you're booking the next step. We did the upfront contract, and we know and truly believe that our solution is one that solves a problem that has meaningful impact and is a high priority to solve for them. There should be no surprises here, and it should be the natural next step. If you structure your call right, you will be able to make a shit ton of money selling the product or service. You just need to do that correctly. And this leads me to to the 13th thing that you really need to master. The better you are at building rapport and showing people that you truly understand their problem and you're able to solve that problem, the only remaining variable is how impactful the solution you sell is. The more impactful the solution, the more money it's going to cost and the more money a salesperson will make. So for example here, I have a good friend of mine who closed a $68 million deal. That's a crazy large deal. And it was very difficult to get that deal done. He had to meet with a whole bunch of different stakeholders. He had to drive a real strong business case. He was meeting folks at an executive level. That is an incredibly large deal and incredibly complex to close. He closed it. But let me tell you something. That deal being so big, $68 million is huge. It solved a way bigger problem. Them spending $68 million for a solution means the problem that solution solved was far in excess of $68 million. And that's why my friend got paid millions in commission to close that deal when there's a salesperson in every town making a couple $100 to solve a small problem. So if you're a salesperson, you're thinking through, how do I make the most money in my career? Go to the biggest problems because you're selling higher value solutions, which justifies a higher pay for the people who sell those solutions. Now, all of this was the foundation of sales, but there's so many situational tactics that I really wish I knew early in my sales career. And if you want to see those, watch this video here.